Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the fantastic turnout. I'm very delighted today to introduce you to one of our graduates, actually, from Royal Roads University from the program, the MA program in Conflict Management, but someone whose successes transcend vastly, having graduated from Royal Roads University. Claude Salhani is editor of the Middle East Times and a contributing editor to United Press International. He was based in some of the hottest spots in the world throughout his foreign correspondence career, including Beirut in Cairo, and then also in Paris, in Brussels, in London, New York, and Washington. Some of his assignments included the major historical crisis of our times, the Jordan-Palestinian clashes, the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, the Lebanese Civil War, the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, the Iraq-Iran War, the invasion of Lebanon, the Iranian Revolution, the Gulf War. There's more. The Czech Velvet Revolution, the downfall, communism, and the war in Iraq, one of them. He's also notably a Pulitzer Prize nominee for his coverage of the Marine Beirut barracks bombing. He is a twice author, and he's here today delivering a speech based on his latest book, While the Arab World Slept, which is a 2009 publication distributed by Ex Libris. So without further ado, thank you, Claude Salhani.
Thank you, Philip, for this wonderful introduction. Professor Cran, Professor Vanini, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here today because I feel that I've come home. I spent some time here, both as a student and then as an associate professor. And it's a great pleasure and an honor to see so many of you here today. Let me see if this works this way. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Middle East in general. Can everybody hear me? I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Middle East in general, and about my book, of course, While the Arab World Slept, the impact of the Bush years in the Middle East, which is, I have some of them here. If any of you are interested, I'd be happy to sell them to you afterwards. A little bit of publicity. But I was, the day after I sent the manuscript to the publisher, I was invited to the Kurdish mission in Washington, D.C. The Kurds, as some of you might know, suffered terribly under Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And when the invasion of Iraq by the U.S.-led, well, the United States really, and when they invaded Iraq, the Kurds started advancing, and Kurdistan today is the safest and nicest part of Iraq. So I had this thought that how strange history can be sometimes, that in Iraq, Bush is seen as a hero. They have named avenues after him, and they've got posters of him all over the place, while in other parts of Iraq they throw shoes at him. So it gave me the idea for this paradox of history. This is just a quick map of what the Middle East under the Ottomans was like, the Ottoman Empire, and then this is the Middle East today. And if you pay attention to the borders, most of the borders, you will understand why I'm telling you this as I go into the talk. Most of these are straight lines drawn in the sand at the close of near the close of World War I by two gentlemen called Sir Mark Sykes and Georges Picot, an Englishman and a Frenchman, during a secret accord that became known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement that divvied up the spoils of the Ottoman Empire between the British and the French, not taking into account the divisions of peoples, the tribes, the clans, and this is part of the reason that we have the problem that we have in the Middle East today. Janet Flanner was a World War II correspondent for The New Yorker who said that history looks queer when you're standing close to it. And this quote came back to me several times while covering the Bush years. I thought it really summed up covering Bush covering the Bush White House was the jackpot from a journalistic point of view. There was never a shortage of topics to cover. There was never shortage of information. I mean, there was one thing after the other. And it's impossible to talk about the Bush years without talking about terrorism. Because during the Bush years, we had three wars, basically, that the United States got involved in. A lot of other countries, including Canada, got involved in some of them. The first war being the war on what Bush liked to call the war on terror, which I think is a misnomer because terror is an emotion and it's hard to fight emotions. But, so I call it the war on terrorism, rather. The second war was a direct reaction from the first war, the invasion of Afghanistan, which if Osama bin Laden and Mullah Omar, the leader of the Taliban, didn't think they were going to get such a reaction, they must be really terrible at strategic planning, because there was no way they could have gotten away with September 11th and not expected the reaction that came. The war in Iraq, the third war, I thought was a complete waste of time, energy, and resources that diverted from the real threat, which was the war on terrorism. Now, Bush said shortly after 9/11 that the war on terror was going to be a long war, and he could have not been more correct. In fact, that war began long before Bush came to the White House. Some people say that some analysts will point to 1983, the attack against the US Marines in Beirut and the French paratroopers, when on October 23rd, 1983, 241 US servicemen, most of them Marines, and 57 French paratroopers were killed in two explosions that took place minutes apart. It was the largest non-nuclear explosion in history. And a lot of Americans point to that date as the start of the war on terror or terrorism. Whereas, in fact, I think you have to go much further back. You have to go back to 1967, the June 6th, 1967 war, the Arab-Israeli war, because what happened there was, in 6 days, the Israelis occupied the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt and the Gaza Strip that was under Egyptian rule. They occupied the Golan Heights from Syria, the West Bank from Jordan, and East Jerusalem, which was then under Jordanian rule. But besides the geographic changes that took place, 67 was a huge humiliation for the Arab world. It was impossible to progress, to start having peace talks after that unless something changed first, because it was a slap in the face to the Arabs. So from 67, we build up to the 1973 war, the October War, or the Yom Kippur War, as it's also known, which changed, redistributed the cards a little bit. The Egyptians bought some face back and were able to negotiate peace. But in between 67 and 73, we have what was known as Black September, 1917 Jordan, where after 67, the Palestinians began organizing themselves into commando groups under the leadership of a civil engineer who was working in Kuwait, a gentleman by the name of Yasser Arafat, who then moved the whole operation to Jordan. And they would run raids into Israel across the Jordan River. Israel would retaliate against Jordan, and that led to clashes between the Jordanians and the Palestinians, in what became known as Black September, when the Jordanian army threw out the Palestinians and they went and settled in Lebanon. In 1970, during that period, the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, hijacked 3 airplanes, a British plane, a Swiss Air, and a TWA, and forced them to land in an abandoned field in the Jordanian desert. It used to be a British airfield called Dawson's Field, which they rebaptized Revolution Airport. And they blew up the planes, but they released their passengers, including Israelis that were on board. So the day after September 11th, 2001, I made the connection, 3 planes, it was very similar. I called